Ernest Hemingway was one of the giants of 20th century American literature. He wrote A Farewell to Arms and For Whom the Bell Tolls. He won the Nobel Prize. He was also an enthusiastic husband, so enthusiastic that he married no fewer than 4 times, and each new wife was the mistress who'd helped break up the previous marriage. Mrs. Hemingway by Naomi Wood is a fictionalised portrait of the 4 women involved, and it tries to answer an obvious question. What exactly did they see in him? Naomi Wood, this is a book about Ernest Hemingway, and yet he himself is a curiously shadowy character. We hear his wives talking about him, describing him. We never know what he himself is thinking. Why?
I think enough ink has been spilled on that area. I think Ernest Hemingway as a character and as a person in history has been so amply written about in so many biographies, and in his own voice you can see it in the collected letters which have just come out. So I decided that I was going to give voice to the 4 women who loved him and were loved by him for the 40 years that he was married. So it was about giving voice to the 4 women rather than about giving more voice to Ernest Hemingway.
And what was it that they saw in him? Because he was often a monstrous man, particularly later in life, but even in his youth he was chronically unfaithful.
Yeah, there was this kind of carousel of wives and mistresses that whipped around each decade, and it does make you think, why on earth did they A, fall in love with him, and B, sort of stick around? I think it was a real mixture of seduction and bewilderment, a kind of toxic combination in a way. The seduction came from an enormous amount of charm. You can see that in the love letters, kind of amazing nicknames and pillow talk that he uses in his love letters, the billet doux to the wives. And, you know, he's incredibly handsome. He was an incredible, talented writer who seemed to serve no apprenticeship in the sort of modernist canon. So I think it was that side of him which made the women fall in love, and then, as you say, there was this incredibly savage, brutal side that must have been completely unendurable and completely alienating to many of the wives.
And in each case, except of course the last one, Mary was still married to him when he committed suicide, but in each case the marriage was invaded by the next wife, and there was a mistress, a ménage à trois. They all knew one another. The first wife, Hadley, actually invited the second wife on holiday with them.
Yeah, there was this kind of ménage à trois set up each decade. Each new marriage was met by another mistress who then went on to become the wife. And I calculated in a moment of sort of quiet one day at the British Library how many days Hemingway had been single. Not unwed, because he was unwed for 7 months in those 40 years, but he was actually single for 0 days between the marriages. And there was this great hunger, I guess, to find partnership, to find companionship. And you can read about that in A Movable Feast. He always talks about this strange emptiness, this strange loneliness after writing, and always Hadley's in the background sort of fulfilling that role of succor.
Now, Hadley was the first one. Let's just very, very quick thumbnail sketches of the 4 of them. Hadley, who was Hadley?
So Hadley was the first wife, married 1921 to 1926. She was the kind of lovely but slightly vapid, shall I say, first wife who he fell in love with and completely canonised in A Movable Feast. She was the one sort of true love that he thought he never got over.
That was after he'd left her, and after he betrayed her with Pauline Pfeiffer, known as Fife, wife number 2. Who was she?
So she was the second wife, 1927. They were married to 1940 when they divorced. She was this woman in A Movable Feast, the devil in Dior, who was the rich come to infiltrate this couple. But they actually stayed together for a very long time, and she oversaw his most prolific period. So he wrote A Farewell to Arms, Death in the Afternoon, Green Hills of Africa. He wrote many, many books while married to her. Her money was quite important, I think. I think he truly did love her, but there was an extent to which her family's wealth helped shore him up and helped provide a kind of advance.
Until he was successful.
Yes, and then there was Martha Gellhorn.
Now, she's most interesting because she was the one who was the most considerable figure in her own right. She was a successful novelist and a very, very successful war correspondent.
Yeah, a tremendous woman and a huge hero of mine since writing the book.
So why did she ever marry him?
I don't know. I think it was such a mistake. A journalist wrote at the time that it was a pairing of flint and steel, and you can completely see that, these two personalities interlocked against each other. You know, the horns are sort of braced against each other. She wrote a huge amount of fiction, as well as her correspondence from the Spanish Civil War, the Vietnamese War. She went to the wars of Central America. She was reporting on Brazilian street children up into her 80s. She was a tremendous woman, and I think always regretted marrying Hemingway because she didn't want to. She said she didn't want to be a footnote in the history of another.
And she was supplanted by another journalist, Mary Welsh,
yes,
who was with him until he committed suicide in 1961. She, in some ways, had the rawest deal, didn't she? The mystique was wearing off by then.
Yeah, she was married to him for the longest time, and she was a correspondent in her own right. But unlike Martha, she left her job and kind of relished the new opportunity to sort of make this beautiful house in Cuba. She was with him at his perhaps most difficult and darkest time. He had increasing problems with alcohol. They were involved in a plane crash in 1954, which left him with very severe wounds and injuries, and she had to nurse him out of that. So it was perhaps the most difficult time.
The critics have been a bit divided about this book. You've had some very, very good reviews. A number of others have said that there's something unsatisfactory about it, and what they seem to be suggesting is that at the heart of it, the character of Hemingway himself never is fully developed. Do you accept that? Was it a challenge to bring him alive?
He was always going to be a bit of an iceberg at the centre of the story, to adapt one of Hemingway's own metaphors. And the point was, in a book called Mrs. Hemingway, not to write a story about Mr. Hemingway. It was about the four women who were surrounded. A few of them found themselves as the kind of mortals around this godlike figure, and he had sort of self-promulgated that idea that he was this kind of this hyper-masculine myth. So the point was not to spill more ink on the Hemingway psyche and the Hemingway trauma from the original wound in the First World War. The point was to explore four fascinating women who were bold, intrepid, independent and fearless, and who found themselves, sometimes fortunately and sometimes unfortunately, married to Ernest Hemingway. So it was about them rather than about him that I was attracted to writing about this book, yeah.
Amy Wood, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.